What's up guys, Travis with TCustomz Productionz, TCustomz.com. Today I'm going to be answering a video question submission that was sent in concerning sampling. I'm going to get into that topic in just a second. First, I just wanted to give you a quick reminder that if you would like to send in a question, a video submission, you can send that to ask@TCustomz.com. Also, just wanted to remind you really quickly that this Thursday we're holding another live music showcase event. So if you would like to get your music played, I want to thank everybody who submitted music in the past weeks, everybody who dropped by the event, showed up to the chat. I'll continue to do this as long as you guys send in your submissions. So if you'd like to have your beat, instrumental, or song reviewed, there will be a link in the description. Some of you guys are receiving an error when you try to resubmit music, and that has been fixed. Make sure to drop by the chat, say hello, give your feedback, constructive criticism, and we'll continue to keep these events going. So today's video question comes in from Tristan. I want to say thanks for sending that in. Let's get into what he has to ask.
So my question or video idea that I had was, once you've created your slice rack, like in your tutorial, you got your MIDI controller set up, whatever, you got a few chops laid, you have a groove going, your drums are in, you've selected a sample, you've chopped it up, but you're having trouble finishing your puzzle, I've heard you call it that before, with the one sample you've chosen. You've got chops you know you want to work with that you like, but you're stuck, so you're ready to dig for a second sample. What are some workflow ideas or tips that could help with bringing in a second sample? Do you just load the sample onto an audio track, slice it to a new MIDI rack, transpose it to your key, and go from there? Well, like how would you go about that? Thanks in advance.
All right, Tristan, I appreciate you sending in that question. Like I said, I think it's a good topic to dig into. I will say first, about a year or maybe a little over a year ago, I did shoot a video with some just like kind of general information, at least the way that I approached incorporating multiple samples into a beat. I may overlap some of the topics that were covered there, but I also want to try to dig a little bit deeper and give you some more tips that might help you in these particular situations. You're having problems in certain cases finishing the puzzle. So you've got, say, let's say a sequence, 8-bar sequence or 16-bar sequence, and you're maybe using one sample for the majority of that track, and you're trying to find some filler sample chops that you can bring from another sample or somewhere else for that matter. So first, before I get into like some workflow tips or ideas that might help you on this, I first just want to say that when you start adding multiple samples into a beat, it's a skill. Taking bits and pieces from audio that's in a different key, that's coming from a different genre, that's coming from a different tonality, different types of instruments, it's very much a skill to go through and hunt and find those quality sounds. You're probably familiar with some of the legendary hip-hop producers that are known for incorporating multiple samples, little chops here and there, and taking horn stabs from this and incorporating that all into one piece of work. It's something that I say I'm not even a master at myself personally. It's something that comes with practice and experimentation. You may be taking audio from different decades, different eras altogether, different genres of music, different keys is almost going to be a given. You're going to have music in different keys, so you're always going to have to be worrying about getting the right keys. If you've got something that's in, say, A minor, and then you've got another sample that's in C sharp minor, we got to figure out, okay, how do I need to shift one or the other or both to get them both on the same playing field? Another thing is chord progression. So for me, I would say one of the things that makes it easier for me to include multiple samples into one is because my ear's in tune with very similar chord progressions. I definitely am a big fan of minor chord progressions and different things in that area. Even if I'm picking from a rock genre or I'm picking from soul, I'm very drawn to minor chords and minor chord progressions. And so even if I'm not necessarily trying to match those up, just naturally when I'm digging through samples, those are typically the types of samples that I'm drawn towards. So then when I do go to pick a sample from something else, it makes it a little bit easier. It might just be a matter of pitching that sample to get it in the right key and fitting it in with the rest of my track. But there's a lot of variations in something like this. You got to keep in mind that music is all relative, so just because this sample sounds dope and this sample sounds dope doesn't mean necessarily that when you collage them together that they're going to work well together, because there could be elements from this that just don't work well with this. And that's where, again, just getting your ear in tune with the types of sounds. I mean, being able to dissect a sample. If you've got a 75% of the sample sequence ready, listening to what elements are in it. If you can isolate and say, okay, there's strings here, there's a nice bass line here, there's different things, what else would I want to actually incorporate? And then it comes down to just work of figuring out where those samples live, what type of genres do you need to be digging in, and spending hours and hours and hours going through sounds. Whether you're dealing in samples or compositions or whatever, one of the biggest aspects of making dope music is finding good quality sound. Like I mentioned in the past, digging through records is not always the easiest thing to do. I'll spend 5 hours going through records and only find a couple good samples that I really want to use. And sometimes it takes that putting in the time. And you were asking if I were to bring in a second sample to supplement the sample that I currently have, would I re-chop it up in a drum rack like I've shown in the sliced into MIDI track method and that sampling method? Or would I just bring in the audio, or how would I manipulate it? And I would say it's case by case. Trial and error for me has been one of my biggest assets when it comes to bringing in multiple samples. Trying stuff out. If it works, great. If it doesn't, great. Keep trying or move on to something else and then revisit that later. When you've got these gaps in the sequence that you're working on, think to yourself, what would I want to fill in the gap here? Is a certain instrument, is a certain type of sound? If you don't know, sometimes you know the key that you want or the chord that you want played there, but you don't know necessarily what instrumentation or what sound. And in that case, like I said, it's just trying it out. And if your ear's in tune with a certain type of chord progression and you have an extra sample folder set aside, then you can just dig into some of those. It might make sense for you to chop it up in another drum rack and then adjust the pitch that way. For starters, you might just drag it over into an audio track and just kind of manipulate the pitch there, maybe change the filter a little bit just to see if you think it might work. And if you do, then spend the time to go in and chop it up and test some things out. I also just want to tie in the video that I shot yesterday into this when I was talking about how to save a sample that you've already sliced for a new session. This would be a perfect opportunity. If you spend a full day or spend a couple hours just going through some of the records that you have, chopping them up, saving them into their own drum racks, then when you're working on some new sessions, you'll have drum racks with samples that are already chopped that you can just drag in, and then it's just experimentation, trying out, pitch shifting. Another tip that might make it easier for you to bring in a second sample, especially when the chord progressions are very different, is the shorter chops are going to be easier to incorporate. So for instance, if you just have a quick one note or one chord chop that you want to bring in, it will be a lot easier for you to pitch and manipulate that to incorporate it into your existing sequence than to take some sort of a chord progression or some run that might not even really make sense in what chord progression you have. Countless scenarios where there's been little gaps or little spaces that I needed to fill in, and I brought in a secondary sample, something that was totally separate, totally different. Could have even been from a different era or genre altogether, but I just tried it out. I did some manipulation, some processing, and it worked in. And again, use your ear. Use your ear. That's the most important asset that you have. So again, understanding the keys of the samples, the chord progressions that are being played, whether they're minor, major keys, how are the melodies and chord progressions going to work together with multiple samples. Even the genres of music could have something to do with it. The different tuning of the instruments. Use this as an example. I don't know if you've ever been to an orchestra or symphony, and before they play, they all tune their instruments together. They're all getting on the same pitch. Now, when you start bringing in multiple samples, yes, you can transpose these samples and pitch shift them, but still yet, it's very possible that this sample, even when these are pretty much in the same key, this is just a little bit sharp of this. And so I've talked about before about detuning a sample where you're shifting in between keys. It's almost like taking a pitch bend, doing like a permanent pitch bend on a sample. And so if this is a little bit sharp, if you transpose it down a half step, it might go a little flat. So now you need to actually detune it and bring it up where these keys actually work together. Sometimes that could be an issue for you. You know, if you're just getting your feet wet with incorporating multiple samples, you might try to isolate the genres just for starters. Like if you know you've got a lot of prog rock that has a lot of guitar in it, you might put a number of those prog rock samples in a folder, and then when you're working on this next prog rock sample, you can kind of pull from that because you know there's going to be a lot of related sounds in that. I'm not telling you this is the only way to do it, but I'm just trying to give you some tips that might help you to kind of transition into it. And then as you understand a little bit more, get your feet wet, you might be able to incorporate totally different genres and totally different sounds into what you're working on. And I've also talked about when I'm layering samples, so not just filling in the gaps with a new sample, but layering on top. It's kind of the same idea and just testing things out. I might load in a sample into my drum rack or into an audio track, figure out what key, just manipulate the pitch bend, maybe even throw a filter, throw some other effect on it, and then just start triggering that sample, different places in it, and triggering it through, and just see if there's any places as I'm playing my sequence back. So I've got that looped and I'm playing it, and I'm just kind of triggering little sounds and see, okay, does this sound cool? Test it out. I don't really think there's any real rules. I think these tips may be able to help you. Maybe any of you watching might have some other tips that might help as well, but just know that the more samples you introduce from different recordings and different keys and different types of instrumentation, there's more variables that go into it. There's more things to take into consideration. Going through heaps of records and sorting them and chopping them up and putting together your own little miscellaneous folders. And I'm actually working to finalize a new miscellaneous sound effects kit that I'm going to be releasing relatively soon. Gone through collections of records. I've further processed them. Basically, it could be another one of those drum racks that you load in at any time and play with whatever type of sample sequence that you're working on for some extra fill-ins or sprinkles, some little sound effects on your track. I think I've covered everything unless I skipped some stuff when I was in the zone, but I hope these tips are helpful. Hopefully you can take these and apply this to maybe sessions that you're currently working on. If you have any other comments, any other suggestions you'd like to leave below, again, feel free to send any of your questions, your video questions to ask@TCustomz.com. If you'd also like maybe a more detailed breakdown on this, I might be able to give you some examples of ways that I've incorporated samples in some of my past sessions. Drop a comment below, let me know, and if I get enough requests, I will go ahead and shoot that video too. If this video was helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe to the channel. You can also visit the blog for more breakdown videos, tutorials, music production tips, Ableton live tutorials. The list goes on. Hope to see you at the live music showcase this Thursday. Link will be in the description, and I'll talk to you in the next video. Peace.